There is a particular kind of suffering that no one warns you about when you are young. It is not the suffering of illness or loss or the long, slow erosion of time. It is quieter than those things and in some ways more persistent. It lives in the space between you and another human being. It arrives without announcement. It finds you in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, in the office, at the family table, in a message notification that makes your stomach tighten before you have even read a single word. The problem of difficult people, people who drain you, provoke you, humiliate you, deceive you, dismiss you, or simply exhaust you, is one of the oldest and most universal forms of human suffering that exists. And yet, almost everything we have been taught about how to handle it is wrong. We have been told to fight back. We have been told to endure. We have been told to cut people off, to protect our energy, to visualize white light, to repeat affirmations. Some of us have been told to pray for our enemies. Others have been told that the problem is that we simply need better communication skills, or a stronger sense of self, or perhaps a good therapist. And perhaps some of that is helpful in its way, but none of it reaches the root.
Because here is what no one tells you, what the popular advice books do not say, what the motivational content does not address, what the wellness industry has polished over and sold back to you in a very attractive package. The problem is not the difficult person. The problem has never been the difficult person. The problem is something far older, far deeper, and far more intimate than that. It lives not in the behavior of the one who wounds you, but in the field of the mind that receives the wound. It lives in the pattern of reaction, the architecture of aversion, the ancient and automated machinery of dosa, which the Pali language, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts, names simply as hatred or ill will, or the hot burning quality of the mind in resistance. When the Buddha taught on this subject, and he taught on it with remarkable precision and remarkable compassion, he did not frame it as a problem of other people. He framed it as a problem of mental states, of akusala dhamma, unwholesome patterns of mind, of the three roots of suffering: lobha, the grasping that pulls; dosa, the aversion that pushes; moha, the delusion that obscures.
Today, in this episode of Buddha Wisdom Teachings, we're going to excavate something that most people sense but cannot name. We are going to follow the Buddha's actual teaching, not the popular version, not the softened version, not the Instagram caption version, but the real thing, drawn from the Pali Canon, the Tipiṭaka, the oldest surviving record of what this extraordinary human being actually said and taught. Once you understand this, once it settles into you not just as an idea, but as a genuine shift in perception, it will completely transform how you move through every difficult relationship in your life. It will change what you feel in your body when someone is cruel. It will change what happens in your mind when someone betrays you. It will change the very quality of the silence between you and the people who have hurt you most. This is not a comfort. This is a confrontation. And that is precisely why it works.
For 2,600 years, human beings have been struggling with exactly the same problem you are struggling with right now. This is worth pausing on. The people who sat with the Buddha in the Jeta Grove, in the forests of Kosala, on the banks of the Naranjara River, they were not abstract spiritual seekers floating above the mess of ordinary life. They were merchants whose business partners had cheated them. They were monks who found certain members of the community insufferable. They were householders whose relatives made every family gathering an exercise in controlled suffering. They were kings navigating betrayal. They were people just like you. And the Buddha did not hand them a philosophy, he handed them a technology.
The distinction matters enormously. A philosophy offers a way of thinking about suffering. A technology offers a way of working with it, a practice, a method, a systematic approach to the actual mechanics of the mind. What the Buddha offered his contemporaries and what the Tipiṭaka has preserved for us across millennia is not a set of comforting thoughts about difficult people. It is a complete operational framework for transforming the way consciousness itself responds to them. To understand this framework, we need to begin with something that the early Buddhist texts treat as foundational, and that modern psychology has only recently begun to catch up with.
The Buddha's teaching starts not with the other person, but with the nature of action itself. In the Chula Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, one of the early texts of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha articulates the principle of kamma, the law of intentional action, with striking precision. He does not describe kamma as fate, or as cosmic punishment, or as the weight of sins. He describes it as the consequence of cetana, intention, the quality of will behind each action. Cetana hang bhikkhave kammang vadami. Monks, it is intention that I call kamma. This is a radical claim. It means that what matters morally, what matters causally, what shapes the future of your suffering or your freedom is not what happens to you, but the quality of intention with which you respond. And here is where the teaching becomes startlingly modern. Contemporary neuroscience has demonstrated, through decades of research into what is called neuroplasticity, that the brain physically rewires itself based on patterns of habitual response. The neural architecture of a person who has spent 20 years responding to provocation with immediate hostility is literally different, structurally, measurably different from the brain of someone who has trained themselves to pause, to observe, to respond with deliberate intention rather than automated reaction. The pathways of dosa, of aversion and ill will, are not metaphors, they are grooves worn into the circuitry of consciousness itself.
The Buddha was teaching this 26 centuries before the neuroimaging technology existed to confirm it. Now, let us go to the central conflict. The central conflict in every difficult relationship is not, as we instinctively believe, between two people. It is between two forces within the single mind that experiences the interaction. The force of paṭigha, the deep-rooted impulse of aversion, of resistance, of the mind pushing away what it finds threatening or unpleasant, and the force of paññā, of wisdom, of clear seeing. Between reaction and understanding, between the automated and the intentional. Difficult people do not create this conflict. They reveal it. They are, in a sense that the Buddhist tradition takes with absolute seriousness, teachers, not because their behavior is acceptable, but because their behavior surfaces in us precisely the patterns that we most need to understand. This is a profoundly uncomfortable idea. Let us hold it carefully.
Wait, have you ever noticed this? Someone says something unkind to you, and before you have consciously processed the content of what they said, your body has already responded. The jaw tightens, the chest closes. Something hot and rapid moves through the nervous system. This happens in milliseconds, faster than thought, faster than language. By the time you have formulated your response, you are already inside the reaction. This is what the Buddha called paṭigha, aversion, resistance, the push reflex of a mind that has encountered something it classifies as threatening or unpleasant. And the teaching of the Tipiṭaka on this point is both precise and devastating. Paṭigha is not caused by the other person. It is caused by a mind that has not yet been trained to see clearly. In the Alaggadupama Sutta, the Buddha uses a luminous analogy. He speaks of a person carrying a raft
a raft that has served them well in crossing a difficult river, but who, once on the other shore, insists on carrying the raft on their back through the forest, burdened by the very thing that was once useful. Our habitual responses to threatening people are like this raft. Once, in an evolutionary or biographical sense, they may have served us. Now they are the weight we carry through every forest, long after the river has been crossed.
The Tipiṭaka, specifically the Digha Nikaya and the Samyutta Nikaya, contains a teaching called paṭigha samuppada, dependent origination, the Buddha's most sophisticated analysis of how suffering arises. It is a chain of 12 links from ignorance, avijja, through craving, tanha, to suffering, dukkha, and it describes something of enormous practical importance. Behavior, all behavior, including the behavior of people who wound us most deeply, arises from conditions. It is not random, and it is not personal. It is the output of a causal chain that began long before the moment of impact. Consider what this actually means. The colleague who belittles your work in meetings, that behavior is not a spontaneous expression of their essential nature. It is conditioned by fear of inadequacy, by early experiences of humiliation, by a nervous system that learned to attack before it could be attacked. The family member who manipulates and guilts, conditioned by patterns of attachment formed in environments where love was transactional, where safety required performance. The stranger who lashes out, conditioned by suffering they may not even be conscious of, expressing itself the only way it knows.
This is not sentimentality. This is causality. And the extraordinary liberating power of this teaching is that when you truly see it, when you genuinely perceive that the person in front of you is not a villain, but a set of conditions producing an output, the entire emotional architecture of the encounter changes. The thing that felt personal stops being personal. Not because you are suppressing your response, not because you are performing a spiritual attitude, but because you are seeing something true. The Buddha calls this sammaditthi, right view, clear seeing, and it is the beginning of everything.
This next part is critically important. The Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta and what it actually demands of us. The Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta, Sutta Nipata 1.8, preserved in the Khuddaka Nikaya of the Pali Canon, is one of the most beloved and most misunderstood texts in all of Buddhist literature. It is recited at the beginning and end of ceremonies. It is carved into stone. It is printed on cards and passed between friends. And because of its beauty, because of the way its language moves like water over smooth stone, it is often received as a kind of poem, something to be appreciated perhaps, to be moved by, but not necessarily to be taken with the full, serious weight that the Buddha intended. Let us take it seriously. The sutta begins not with lovingness, but with a prerequisite. Before the Buddha speaks of metta, of goodwill, of loving kindness, he speaks of what must first be cultivated in a person who wishes to reach a state of peace. Sako uju cha sujucha, suwacho cha samudu, anattimani. Capable, upright, straightforward, gentle in speech, without conceit. This is not the language of sentiment. This is the language of character formation. Before you can extend metta to the difficult person, you must have done the interior work that makes genuine metta possible, rather than a performance of it.
Then comes the famous instruction, Sukhino wa kemino hontu, sabe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at ease. And critically, na paro parang nikubeta, na ti manyeta katachi nankanchi. Let none deceive another. Let none look down on anyone anywhere.
and Vyarosana paṭigha sanya, nanyamanyasa dukkham ichcheya. Through anger or ill will, let none wish suffering to another. Notice what the text does not say. It does not say, be fond of everyone. It does not say, enjoy the company of those who harm you. It does not say, welcome abuse with a smile. The Pali word metta, in its deepest sense, is not an emotion in the way we use that word in modern English. Bhikkhu Bodhi, one of the foremost contemporary translators of the Pali Canon, describes metta as the wish for the welfare and happiness of all beings, a disposition, an intentional orientation of the mind, rather than a feeling that must be conjured on demand.
This distinction is everything. When we collapse metta into a feeling, into warmth, into affection, into the sensation of liking someone, we make it impossibly fragile. Feelings are subject to conditions. They arise and pass. They cannot be sustained through a 2-hour meeting with someone who has been systematically undermining you for 3 years, but an intention can be sustained. An orientation of the mind, a deliberate, cultivated stance of, I do not wish suffering for this being, regardless of what they do. This is not dependent on the behavior of the other person. It is dependent only on the quality of training in the mind that holds it. This is closer to what the behavioral scientists call a value, a direction of movement that remains constant even when the emotional weather changes. Research in acceptance and commitment therapy, developed by Stephen Hayes and colleagues at the University of Nevada, demonstrates that psychological flexibility, the ability to act in accordance with values, even in the presence of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, is one of the strongest predictors of mental health and behavioral effectiveness. The Buddha was articulating this principle with remarkable clarity 2.5 millennia before the clinical trials.
The 4 Brahmavihāras, a complete architecture of response. The Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta opens the door, but the full room is the Brahmavihāra teaching, the 4 Brahmavihāras, the 4 divine or sublime abidings, described across multiple texts in the Tipiṭaka, including the Chula Vedala Sutta, the Maharahulovada Sutta, and particularly the Metta sections of the Anguttara Nikāya. Brahmavihāra translates literally as divine dwelling or sublime abiding, a state of mind so elevated, so spacious, so free from the contractions of self-interest and aversion, that it was compared to the quality of consciousness of the Brahma realm, the highest domain of existence in the Indian cosmological framework. But it is not a religious concept in the way we might think. It is a description of 4 specific mental qualities cultivated as practices, which together constitute what we might call a complete response system for the full range of human difficulty. Metta, goodwill, loving kindness, the unconditional wish for well-being. Not warmth, not affection, not like. The wish, may this being be well. Extended first to oneself, then to loved ones, then to neutral persons, then, and here is where the practice becomes genuinely demanding, to those who have harmed us.
Karuṇā, compassion, the wish that beings be free from suffering. Karoti means to do, to act, and compassion in the Pali sense is not passive sympathy, but active orientation toward the relief of pain. When you look at a person who is behaving badly and you can see, really see, that they are suffering, something shifts in the quality of your encounter with them. Not toward permissiveness, toward clarity, toward what the clinicians call de-escalation from the inside out. Muditā, sympathetic joy, appreciative joy, the capacity to take pleasure in the well-being and success of others without the corrosive interference of envy or comparison. In the context of difficult people, this quality addresses something subtle but important: the relief that can arise when a rival succeeds, when someone who has treated you badly is shown to be, after all, a human being with genuine capacities and genuine moments of happiness. To be able to feel that relief without bitterness, this is muditā. And upekkhā, equanimity, the quality of the balanced, non-reactive mind, the mind that is neither pulled by attraction nor pushed by aversion, the mind that can encounter extreme conditions, including extreme people, without losing its center. In the Pali, upekkhā is sometimes described as the perfection of the other three, the quality that prevents metta from becoming sentimentality, karuṇā from becoming pity, and muditā from becoming excitement.
This is the complete toolkit. Progress check. We have now established what the Tipiṭaka actually teaches about difficult people, that the problem is not a person but a pattern. We have examined the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta with the seriousness it deserves, and we have mapped the 4 Brahmavihāras as a practical response architecture. Now we go deeper into how this actually works in the mind, in the body, in the real fabric of encounter.
Anattā and the depersonalization of harm. This is something you genuinely need to know. One of the most disorienting and ultimately liberating teachings in the entire Pali Canon is the doctrine of Anattā, non-self, the teaching that what we call the self is not a fixed, permanent, independently existing entity, but a process, a flow, a constantly shifting pattern of aggregates: rupa, form; vedana, sensation; sanya, perception; sankhara, mental formations; vijnana, consciousness, none of which, individually or collectively, constitutes a solid, unchanging I. This is taught most famously in the Anattā Sutta, the discourse on the characteristic of non-self, which is, according to the canonical narrative, the second discourse the Buddha ever gave. He taught it to the same 5 ascetics who had just received the teaching on the middle path and the 4 noble truths. He pointed to each of the aggregates and asked of each one, "Is this yours? Is this what you are? If it were truly yours, could you determine it? Could you say, 'Let my form be thus, let my feeling be thus'?" The answer, of course, is no, and the implication, which the Buddha unpacks with methodical care, is that if there is no fixed self in you, there is equally no fixed self in the person across from you. The difficult person is not a fixed entity with a permanently hostile essence. They are a process, a flow of conditioned responses, arising moment by moment from causes and conditions, some of which stretch back decades before this present encounter.
When this is seen clearly, taking things personally, which is the primary mechanism by which difficult people cause us suffering, becomes literally incoherent. There is no fixed I to be personally injured. There is a process, and processes can be met with other processes, including the process of wisdom, of compassion, of equanimity. Evolutionary psychology offers a parallel insight here, though it arrives from a very different direction. The field of social neuroscience has documented what researchers call the social pain overlap, the finding that social rejection and social aggression activate the same neural circuits as physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which processes the distress component of physical pain, is equally activated by interpersonal rejection. This is why being dismissed by a colleague feels, neurologically, like a small but genuine injury. The system was designed, in the long arc of evolution, to register social exclusion as a survival threat, because for most of human history, exclusion from the group meant death. But we no longer live in those conditions, and the Buddha's teaching on Anattā is, among many things, a technology for updating the response system.
for recognizing that the perceived threat is, in most cases, a conditioned response to a conditioned stimulus, neither of which reflects ultimate reality.
Hold on, there is one more thing that matters: the boundary that wisdom requires. Buddhism is sometimes caricatured, and this caricature is worth confronting directly, as a tradition that counsels passive acceptance of harm, that dresses suffering in spiritual language and calls it enlightenment, that teaches the injured to see their injury as an illusion, while the one who injures walks away unchanged. This is not what the Tipiṭaka teaches. The fourth Brahmavihāra, upekkhā, equanimity, is precisely the teaching that addresses this misreading. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the spiritual posture of someone who has trained themselves not to care. The Pali term carries the meaning of a mind that is balanced, sama, meaning level, even, not because it has suppressed its responses, but because it has developed sufficient depth and stability to hold difficult experiences without being capsized by them.
And this stability, this genuinely cultivated, genuinely earned equanimity is entirely compatible with the drawing of boundaries. Indeed, it is the only foundation from which genuine boundaries can be drawn. A boundary that arises from anger is a wall built from fire. It protects in the moment, but it burns everything it touches, including the person who builds it. A boundary that arises from equanimity, from the clear, compassionate, undefended seeing of what is true, is a different thing entirely. It says, I see what is happening here. I see the conditions producing this behavior. I hold no hatred for this person, and I am not going to continue making myself available for this. The Buddha, in several places in the Tipiṭaka, demonstrates this exact quality. In the Kakachupama Sutta, the simile of the saw, he describes a scenario of extreme provocation and teaches his monks to maintain a mind of metta even in the face of it. But he also, in other suttas, demonstrates clear discernment about what relationships and environments are conducive to the path and which are not. He encourages monks to leave environments that are spiritually destructive. He encourages association with Kalyana-mitta, good friends, noble companions. He is emphatic that the environment in which consciousness develops matters enormously.
This is not contradiction, it is completeness. The teaching says, hold no hatred, for hatred is a poison that you drink hoping someone else will be harmed. And also, use wisdom to discern what is constructive, what is destructive, what is possible in this relationship, and what is not. In the language of modern psychology, this maps precisely to what Marsha Linehan calls dialectical thinking, the capacity to hold two apparently contradictory truths simultaneously. I wish this person well-being, and I am not going to allow this behavior to continue. Both statements are true, neither cancels the other.
The neuroscience of what the Buddha discovered. Research into the neuroscience of contemplative practice has, over the last 2 decades, produced findings that would have been considered extraordinary if they had not been replicated so consistently across so many different laboratories. In a series of landmark studies, Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his team used functional magnetic resonance imaging to examine the brains of long-term meditators, monks with tens of thousands of hours of practice in what the Buddhist tradition calls Brahmavihāra meditation, particularly loving kindness and compassion. What they found was measurable structural difference. The left prefrontal cortex, associated with positive affect, approach motivation, and emotional regulation, showed dramatically elevated activity compared to control groups. The amygdala, The brain's alarm system, the region most implicated in the rapid automatic fear and aggression response, showed reduced reactivity to aversive stimuli.
Training the mind in metta, in compassion, in equanimity, training it in precisely the way the Pali Canon prescribes, physically changes the brain. The pathways of aversion become less worn. The pathways of intentional, compassionate response become more available. This is not metaphor. This is biology. But the Buddha did not discover this through brain scanning. He discovered it through direct observation of consciousness, through the same investigative rigor that produces good science: hypothesis, method, sustained practice, verification of results. The Pali word for this mode of careful inner inquiry is yoniso manasikara, wise, thorough attention, attention that goes to the root, that does not stop at surfaces. And what yoniso manasikara reveals, when applied consistently and honestly to the experience of being provoked by a difficult person, is something surprising. The majority of the suffering is not coming from them. It is coming from the quality of attention we are bringing to the encounter. This is not comfortable to hear. It is exactly what needs to be heard.
Stoicism, Christ, and the question of inner transformation. Philosophy has approached this territory from multiple directions, and the convergences are instructive, as are the divergences. The Stoic tradition, particularly articulated by Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations and by Epictetus in the Discourses, places enormous emphasis on the discipline of the inner citadel, the sovereign domain of the rational will that no external force can enter without permission. You have power over your mind, not outside events, Marcus writes, and this resonates deeply with the Buddhist teaching on paṭigha, on the distinction between the stimulus and the response, on the fundamental freedom of the intentional mind. But there is a difference. Stoicism, at its most rigorous, cultivates an equanimity that can sometimes edge toward what we might call a kind of magnificent indifference, a withdrawal from the emotional register of life rather than a transformation of it. The Stoic ideal tends toward apatheia, the absence of disturbance. The Buddhist ideal tends toward something more dynamic, toward a mind that is both stable and warm, both clear and actively compassionate. Upekkhā is not apatheia. It is balanced engagement, not disengagement.
The Christian teaching, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, arrives at a similar instruction through a different architecture. The resonance with metta is real and worth acknowledging, but the grounding is different. Christian ethics locates the imperative in a theological command and a promise of divine reward. Buddhist ethics locates it in a precise analysis of cause and effect. Hatred increases suffering in the one who hates as much as in the one who is hated. The motivation is not obedience, but understanding. And this distinction matters in practice. A motivation rooted in understanding is self-sustaining in a way that obedience is not. When you genuinely see that your anger is harming you, not just someone you love, not just some future cosmic ledger, but you, right now, in the quality of your consciousness, the motivation to release it does not require willpower. It requires only continued clear seeing. Behavioral economics adds a final dimension here. The research of Daniel Kahneman and colleagues on what they call System 1 and System 2 thinking maps almost perfectly onto the Buddhist distinction between conditioned reaction and intentional response. System 1, fast, automatic, evolutionarily ancient, heuristic-driven, is the system that produces the flash of anger when someone disrespects you. System 2, slow, deliberate, effortful, capable of considering consequences, is the system that the Buddha was training when he prescribed sustained contemplative practice. The Brahmavihāra practices are, among many things, a method of training System 2 to intervene in System 1's automated outputs, not through force, but through the gradual cultivation of alternative neural pathways. This is why practice matters. This is why the Buddha did not simply offer a philosophical reframe, he offered a training.
Let us bring everything together. The first point, the problem of difficult people is never, at its root, a problem about the other person. It is a problem about the state of the mind that encounters them, the trained or untrained quality of response, the presence or absence of paṭigha, the depth or shallowness of the seeing. The Tipiṭaka makes this clear with a consistency that spans thousands of pages across multiple collections of text. The second point, metta, loving kindness, goodwill, is not a feeling you manufacture. It is an intention you cultivate. It is an orientation of the mind that says, regardless of conditions, regardless of behavior, regardless of how I have been treated, I do not wish suffering for this being. And this orientation, as the neuroscience has confirmed and as 26 centuries of practice have demonstrated, transforms the quality of every encounter in which it is held. The third point, the four Brahmavihāras, metta, karuṇā, muditā, and upekkhā, are a complete system. They are not alternative sentiments to choose between. They are facets of a single, integrated mode of consciousness, simultaneously warm and clear, simultaneously compassionate and bounded, simultaneously engaged and unshaken. And most importantly, metta without paññā is naive. Paññā without metta is cold. The path that the Buddha walked and taught is neither of these things. It is a mind that sees deeply and responds without hatred, a mind that holds no enemy images, not because it is blind to harm, but because it has seen through to the suffering that produces harm. This is not weakness. In a world that has made hostility an art form, this is the most radical and demanding form of strength that exists.
Here is what I would like to invite you to do after this episode. The first step. In the next conversation you have with someone who irritates or challenges you, before you respond, take one full breath. Not as a delay tactic, as an interruption of the automatic. In that breath, ask, even briefly, what is conditioning this behavior? What suffering might be producing this output? You do not need to answer the question. The asking alone changes the quality of what comes next. The second step, begin a short daily practice, even 5 minutes is sufficient to begin, of the metta recitation. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings be happy. Start with yourself, which is harder than it sounds. Move to someone you love easily, then to a neutral person, someone you see regularly but feel nothing particular about, and eventually, when you are ready, to someone who has been genuinely difficult. Do not force warmth. Simply practice the intention, may this being be well. May this being be free from suffering. The third step, make the distinction in your own mind between upekkhā and avoidance. There are relationships in your life that need boundaries, not because of hatred, but because of clear seeing. This week, identify one place where a boundary needs to be drawn, not from anger, but from wisdom. And notice the difference in quality when the boundary arises from clarity rather than from aversion. Start with whichever step is most immediately possible, but what matters most is that you begin. Tell us in the comments which of these 3 steps speaks most directly to something in your own life right now. We genuinely want to know. If you have had an experience, a relationship, a moment of genuine encounter with a difficult person that shifted something in you, share it here.
These are the conversations that matter. Subscribe to Buddha Wisdom Teachings to continue this exploration. We will be moving next into the territory of the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the 4 foundations of mindfulness and what it actually teaches us about working with the mind in real time, in real conditions, in the real world. And let us know in the comments what topic you would most like us to explore next. This is a community, and its direction belongs to everyone in it. There is a being somewhere in your life right now. Someone whose name arrives in your mind with a weight attached to it, a contraction of the chest, a subtle hardening of something in you that would rather not be there. The Buddha saw this being. He saw not the wound they had caused, not the pattern of their behavior, not the label you and others have attached to them in the quiet taxonomy of who is good and who is difficult in your world. He saw something older and more fundamental, a being in suffering, producing the only outputs their conditions had trained them to produce, moving through their days inside the same thick weather of ignorance and craving and aversion that constitutes the ordinary human condition, the condition from which you, too, are in the slow, difficult, beautiful process of waking. This does not ask you to approve of harm. It does not ask you to offer yourself as a surface for someone else's unprocessed pain. It asks only this, that you see clearly, that before you react, you look, that in the space between stimulus and response, that extraordinary, vanishingly small, cosmically significant space that the entire contemplative tradition is dedicated to expanding, you remember what the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta says, not as poetry, but as instruction, as technology, as a light held inside the oldest darkness of the human mind. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings live in joy. Even the difficult ones, especially the difficult ones, because they, more than anyone, are carrying what they have not yet learned to put down. And perhaps, if you can find it in the spacious, trained, clear-seeing stillness of a mind that has done its work, you can offer them something no adversarial encounter ever will. Not defeat, not surrender, not even forgiveness in the sense we usually mean it, but the quiet, luminous, undefeatable quality of a mind that simply refuses to be diminished by what it encounters. That is the path. That is what the Buddha pointed to when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and looked without flinching at everything the mind produces, and chose, through that extraordinary quality of intentional seeing, to move toward freedom rather than toward the ancient grooves of suffering. The path is here, exactly here, in the next encounter that tests you. Walk it.